Dr. Robert Gore. Hi, welcome.
What's going on? How you feeling? It's great to see y'all again.
This is part 2 of our conversation.
This is part 2.
And I have so many questions. Are you exhausted of being a doctor?
I haven't had vacation in a long time.
Like what's long?
So my actual real vacation like chill out, do nothing. The last one was last year around August.
Okay.
And so I'm overdue. We're going on vacation in a couple of weeks. So
Oh,
I'll
good.
get a chance
You
to
deserve
kind of
it.
rest and recover.
Yes.
Because I think like the book came out last year, and working on touring and doing lectures and doing talks. And so I've done some work vacations, some staycations.
Right.
But
That
really
doesn't count.
No, they don't count.
That's not a vacation.
No,
Yeah.
no, they don't count.
Yeah. And you're an emergency physician, just so that we're all on the same page. This is heavy duty work.
Does that mean ER?
Yeah. ER, yeah, it's definitely the ER. Where I trained in my residency training in Chicago was Cook County Hospital. So the TV show ER is based off of that. ER, like Cook County Hospital is county general / where ER took place.
So is it just like ER?
Now ER is just like the TV show. I'd probably say the most realistic thing was, remember the TV show Scrubs?
Yeah.
Because Scrubs was more satire, but that's all the stuff we say and what we think. Like Grey's Anatomy stuff, it's cool, it's interesting, you got a lot of drama, but Scrubs is probably a little bit more realistic. The TV show The Pit that's out right now is probably a lot more similar.
So you're like sleeping at the hospital in between.
No.
Okay,
Well,
no. So
Or did you used to have to do that?
I used to. So when you're in residency and you're doing the training and stuff, you'll be on call for extended periods of time for like a 24-hour period. So those days you're going to sleep in the hospital. But no, I'm 19 years out of residency. So I'm at the hospital on the overnight shift. So I work afternoon and evenings from like 3 to 11, 3 to midnight, which can easily turn to 1 a.m.
Oh, man.
Or I'll do 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., which can easily turn to 8 or 9, depending on what's going on.
So what are some of the cases that you take on? Like, what does that look like inside of an ER?
Whatever you can think of is what
Damn.
we see. So like if I think about my schedule, like the past few shifts that I've had this week, I've had people who've been stabbed in the chest. I've had people who are being diagnosed with being pregnant. And that's why they're coming in with abdominal pain, nausea, and vomiting, and kind of cranky. There are patients who have gone into cardiac arrest because their heart stopped and they had a series of chronic, bunch of different illnesses. I've had patients who come in because they broke their ankle. They fell on an outstretched hand, what we call foosh. They trip, fall, and they break their wrist. Patients who are having heart attacks, strokes, people who are passing out because they didn't drink enough water, and we had the heat wave stretch.
That's right, yeah.
Sundays are really crazy because that's like a stress test for older people who are going out to church. You're inside all week, and then you go to church. You're standing up, you're sitting down, standing up, sitting down.
Oh.
And that's exercise. For somebody who exercises regularly, it's no biggie. For somebody who does this once a week or once every few weeks, it's a stress test. So people will pass out. So we see a lot of different things coming in the ER.
Wow, that is so interesting.
Kids, ear infections, snot, boogers, cough, weird rash. Parents be like, I don't know what's going on. My kid won't sleep. All the stuff that
Right.
Like a lot of us in here, we all have toddlers.
That's right.
Why is my kid not sleeping?
Right.
Unfortunately, I at least know the science behind why he's not sleeping sometimes. But parents come in, and now I feel like I'm a little bit of an OG parent because my kid's 5, and so when I say this is what's going on with your kid, and don't do this doesn't work, they go, oh, okay, I understand.
Like what?
Like I really mean it. Well, like if like when kids are having cough in the middle of the night, I'll elevate my kid's head just so he's not choking on his secretions. So if he's got snot, he's got a lot of mucus and it's dripping down the back of his throat, he's going to keep coughing and coughing and coughing.
Right.
Just prop the bed up, put a little bit of a pillow underneath the mattress. It raises his head a little bit so he's not choking on his secretions, so he's not coughing in the middle of the night. Kid sleeps better. Everybody in the house sleeps better. And if he sleeps better, he gets better because his immune system can kind of get a chance to have that respite period.
Oh, this is so,
so great.
It makes sense, right? You hear
it makes sense.
Yeah, of course. Now that makes sense.
Or my kid, or somebody be like, oh, my kid hasn't pooped in like 3 days.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay.
What do we do?
What do we do? You can give a suppository in some cases. You also want to rule out that there's no other pathology to make sure the kid doesn't have a bowel obstruction.
Right.
Is the kid not pooping because he or she has cuts around the rectum area, what we call like anal fissures. So all these different things we have to look at and evaluate when somebody comes in with a given emergency. we come up with what's called a differential a problem list first, because sometimes patients have a ton of problems, and then for each problem we have a differential diagnosis for each problem, and the differential diagnosis is really kind of this cadre of potential causes for what this illness or injury is presenting. Like somebody's coming in with chest pain. It's like, all right, is your chest pain because you have a cardiac event? Are you having a heart attack? Is it because somebody punched you in the chest?
Right.
Is it because you have zoster or a rash on the chest that's herpetic in nature?
Right.
Is it because you've been lifting weights and you were doing something on one side of your body and you just lifting weights because you're trying to get that left arm a little bit bigger than the other one because the right one is bigger and people making fun of you, or you just started a push-up routine. And that's why you got chest pain because your muscles are sore, or do you have a blood clot in your chest? Do you have a pneumonia? Do you have a pleural effusion, which is fluid around the lung? So we're thinking of all these different things for like one specific problem, and we run a bunch of different diagnostic tests, ask you a bunch of questions, and that lets us know what we think is going on. And a lot of times we don't know what's going on. We at least want to make sure we rule out the stuff that's going to kill you.
That's the most important part.
I'm like, look, I don't know what this is. You can follow up with your doctor, but I know what it's not. And because I know what it's not, I think you can go home and rest.
What made you want to be in the ER and not be the primary doctor?
The emergency department is where people who are kind of ADHD go. We can't sit still. It's hard as heck to sit still. I'm clasping my hands right now because I feel like I'm supposed to be doing something with my hands. And I keep knocking the microphone because I know my body just naturally wants to move. But I like a lot of different things. And if you kind of have a lot of ideas, you like to see different, you're okay with chaos, you're okay with being in organized confusion, then the emergency department is for you. But I also liked, because it allowed me to be on the front lines. When patients come in the hospital or they get admitted for whatever disease process or pathology that they come in with, most of the detective work has happened in the emergency department. And so they're still doing more detective work on the floors. There's no shade to my colleagues who do internal medicine, but I just thought internal medicine was a little bit boring. It's a little bit slower. It's a lot more cerebral. I think all medicine is cerebral, but it was just a different kind of cerebralness that was going on with medicine. And I like being around where the action was.
Have you come across people who had near-death experiences and shared with you what they saw?
I see that. I take care of people who have near-death experiences.
Okay, so what's that dynamic like? Do you ask them questions?
I ask them questions, what's going on. My first thing is to keep you alive. So, we're going to go, ask you a series of questions. What took place? What happened? Making sure their airway is okay. Make sure they're breathing okay. Make sure their circulation is okay. That's what we call the ABCs of medicine, or your primary survey. And then after that, once I know the person's stable and we've ruled out all the other stuff and they look like they want somebody to talk to, and the ER might be a little bit calmer, so I can spend a little more time talking to patients, then I'm like, okay, well, what's going on? What happened? Why did you do this? What were you thinking in some cases? And, finding out, because I want to make sure they don't come back for this thing in the future.
Of course.
Because, a lot of accidents and injuries can happen. People can get sick on, traveling, but we're trying to figure out what are the patterns of behavior so that you don't have to recreate these patterns of behavior. And a lot of it is really just kind of highlighting, okay, this is what took place. These are some things that may prevent this from happening in the future. So you're doing a lot of education, and through that, because you've built up this rapport, you've kept somebody alive, they'd be like, Doc, this is what the stuff that was other things that were going on with me. I've got this going on with my wife, my kids, my family, and I just wasn't thinking straight. And this is why this happened. Or this is why I just wasn't able to be present. They may not use that vocabulary, but you kind of decipher, say, oh, you weren't present. You were stressed out. You were traumatized. And because you were traumatized, you self-medicated. Because you self-medicated, you weren't present, and you were self-medicating because nobody's ever given you the space to process the trauma and these horrendous experiences that you've had. And this is why you keep coming in for substance use disorder. This is why you keep coming in with these injuries and falling, because you've been intoxicated. So it's an interesting thing to be able to dive in and really develop a relationship with patients, and they're sharing their most intimate feelings, their most intimate thoughts, and things that have changed their life or shaped their lives.
Was there a near-death moment where they shared with you, I saw the light?
Yeah, they went beyond.
older patients may say that, or they go,
Really?
Yeah, they say, I know he's coming for me soon, and it's kind of like my grandmother would say stuff like that, and my grandfather said stuff like that, and when they said it, I was a lot younger. I was
Right.
I was like in my late 20s, early 30s, and they were right. They did wind up passing on, and it's almost like they could foresee it happening.
Oh my God.
But it was, I have to say, the times that I've heard that, the patients have always they've been at peace with what was coming.
Wow.
Not like I don't want to die. When I see a young person, they've got some kind of cancer or they've got a series of injuries and that stuff is life threatening, and you're like, okay, this looks pretty bad. They don't want to die. But when older people, when they've had like these beautiful lived experiences and they have their loved ones around them, sometimes they know. They go, okay, I'm ready. My grandmother kept saying, oh, I'm ready. It's going to happen. I might not be here for too long. And I'm like, it was kind of like, don't say that stuff. That's stuff that happens on TV. But then when it happens, you go, oh, wow, okay, no, they were ready.
What do you say in that moment if your patient says that to you? Do you try to comfort them, or do you just let them speak?
At this, so this is 23 years of me being a physician right now, and I'm a lot more open to hearing what they have to say, because I think a lot of times we're so, when we're younger, we're like, okay, I gotta fix you, and then we're looking at people as I have to fix you, as opposed to, no, you are somebody who's going through an experience and you're ready to transition. And a lot of the, when people going through stress, when you're going through life, just lifing, like life be lifing, people need to express that. And somebody was talking about, oh, I'm having these troubles with my family. I'm going through these experiences. I have this cancer. I have this pulmonary disease, this lung disease, and my lungs are fibrotic, and I'm dying. And sometimes they just want to get things off of their chest. And sometimes they may tell you. And if you're one of the only physicians of color and you've already built up that relationship, and I'm also practicing in the community that I grew up in. I grew up in Brooklyn. I practice in Brooklyn. And people start telling you things that they may not tell their family members.
Oh my gosh.
And so a lot of times you just let them, like, people need to speak. And as long as there's not another emergency that I have to leave right then and there, then I let them talk. Because I think it's cathartic. That's why we go to therapy. That's why you got this dope couch right here that I'm sinking into. I'm feeling really relaxed. I feel like I got stuff I got to get off my chest and stuff I got to say.
Get it off your chest, yeah.
And your time in the ER, it actually lent you to be an author, to write this book, right? Tell us about the book. Treating Violence, an emergency room doctor takes on a deadly epidemic.
Yeah, no, this is my book, Treating Violence, an emergency room doctor takes on a deadly American epidemic. This is, I don't want to say life story, because I still got a lot of life to have and to live and to experience. But this was me expressing all the different things that I've gone through as an emergency medicine physician, but really kind of going over my experiences with violence and trauma. I grew up in pre-gentrified Brooklyn, and I remember the crack cocaine era, and I felt like I was protected. I grew up in a household with both my parents. We lived on a third floor in a brownstone apartment. We were renting. We didn't own it. We didn't have that kind of money. But I felt there were artists who lived on our block. I grew up on the same block that Spike Lee grew up on. His father was our music teacher. There were a bunch of Mr. Lee. Shout out to Bill Lee and the Lee family. Mr. Lee was our music teacher. He taught all of us on the block like how to harmonize and about musical scales. There were other artists and folks who were on the block, and they really engaged with all the kids. So in a way that was fruitful. So it was a beautiful space. But as we grew up, and like a few years later, this is the 1980s, this thing called crack emerged, and all of a sudden you start seeing people that look like zombies walking around in the neighborhood. Even though our block was a really nice block, we lived right around the corner from on Myrtle Avenue, and Myrtle Avenue had you have your shops and stores and things a little bit different. We lived right across the street. And so Fort Greene Park was right here, and then across the street from Fort Greene Park, and right at the corner are the different public housing units from within Fort Greene, and beautiful people that are living in public housing. But when you're living in a space and you're highly vulnerable, it kind of puts you at risk to engage in certain practices to regulate your system. And people start putting out a product that was super addictive and that was transformative. All of a sudden, you got people who were smoking crack, and we saw that evolve during that time. And just, we also saw increasing amounts of urban violence that were taking place. You went from seeing heroin addicts in Fort Greene Park, like at the top of the hill. They always used to shoot up because there were a lot of musicians and artists, and they would, do stuff in the park.
And that was popular at that time.
That was popular
that was
back
like
then.
the go-to use.
And that was the go-to. But then all of a sudden, crack just completely shifted things, and we saw people who were violent in a way that we had never seen before. And as a kid, you don't know anything different. So it's not like, okay, wow, things were peaceful before. You're like, okay, I'm 8 years old, I'm 9 years old, and I'm watching these after school specials about doing drugs, and people talk about this thing called crack, and you see people who you remember looking okay, and all of a sudden their eyes are kind of bugged, they're shaking, their teeth don't look right. Oof. And we're living in a neighborhood that's supposed to be kind of safe, but it's a lot different now living, and for people who live in Fort Greene, it looks nothing like it did back then. But when you have those spaces, when you have communities where you have the haves and have-nots, a lot of violence and trauma are going to take place. A lot of substance abuse is going to take place. When you have those resources that aren't always being shared with one group of people, and another group of people have access to that, then you're going to kind of be like, look, I don't want that. I want to be in a different situation because I can't have that situation, and I'm going through these changes. I don't have access to behavioral health, and so the only way I know how is to self-medicate. And when people aren't calling it self-medication, but that's really what it is. I feel like a lot of violence and trauma is really just ways in which, like when people use certain things or they do certain activities, is really they're doing things to kind of regulate their nervous systems,
right?
Without even realizing that's what it is. There's a science behind it. It's just when we rest and when we sleep and we have community, that's a way to regulate our nervous system.
Right.
When we soothe our kids, when we soothe our toddlers to help them try to go to bed even when they don't, just that hand on the back and just kind of relaxing. That's us helping them regulate their nervous systems. For a lot of people who are traumatized, they don't have somebody to put their hand on their back. They don't have a safe space, and so they're always on guard. And when you're in that situation, things can be very volatile.
What did you learn about yourself when you wrote your book?
Oh, wow. Writing the book some parts were easier than others. I felt good because I finally got a chance to go through all the brain dumps and get every thought and feeling that I ever had, and most of the experiences, not most experiences, but a lot of the experiences that I've had as a physician and growing up, I got to put it on paper. The hardest part was when, when you write things, you'll dump out facts. And then when your editor goes, okay, I want you to dig deeper. Well, what were you feeling behind then? So, I think in medicine, we're really good about describing the events and situations that have taken place. But when you have to start reflecting it, that's when it became hard, because some of those feelings and thoughts had been tucked away for so long. And, I got emotional. Sometimes I'd be writing and I'm like, I start crying and I'm like, dang, I haven't thought about this person or this case in a long time. And I remember exactly what I was doing at the time, but because it wasn't really okay for you to express those thoughts and feelings in those spaces, you just tuck it in.
Right.
And many of us, of a certain age category, we kept all those emotions in. And until you have some other event take place, like a writing exercise, and you're working on a chapter, or somebody who has nothing to do with medicine asks, well, what'd you think about that? I've never seen anything like that. I've never seen somebody decapitated before. Oof. I've never seen somebody shot in the chest or shot in the face before. I've never had to pronounce a little kid dead.
Oh my God.
What was that like? And then you go, oh, wow. Yeah. And then, I started writing, I've written chapters beforehand, but then, when my kid was born, my writing changed, because now I'm looking at a lot of the stuff I'm writing through a very different lens, through a very protector kind of lens. And it's like, oh, wow, this is really serious. When I've pronounced people dead who've been killed, now I kind of can only imagine what that feels like as a parent. I'm like, what would happen? How would I respond? How would I react to this information that's being disseminated? So the book itself really brought forth a lot of different emotions. Somebody asked me, who did I write it for? I was like, I really wrote it for me, because I had to get a lot of stuff off my chest, and I didn't want to compartmentalize emotions anymore. And I thought it was helpful to kind of create almost a template and a guide for other people who've been dealing with trauma and dealing with violence. It's like, okay, you're gonna make mistakes. My father and grandfather would be like, you're gonna make mistakes. They don't have to be the same mistakes that we've made. And that's so right. Using, the book itself is kind of a template. The beauty of what you all have been doing with telling stories, both your own and helping other people share their stories, is so that people can learn from these experiences.
Yes.
That's why we listen to you all. It's cathartic. We want there to be a different level of evolution occurring within our species and within our communities, and they're only going to happen with information sharing. So this is my way to do it. At least that's the science behind it.
Right.
But I just felt like I had a lot of stuff to get off my chest too.
Which chapter means the most to you?
It was chapter 8. Chapter 8, something exciting. Yep. Something exciting was it was an experience that I had when I was a resident in Chicago. It was my second year of residency, but it was my first year doing emergency medicine. I had, as a part of our program, I did a year of internal medicine. Mm-hmm. And there was a trauma patient that I took care of who was like in his mid-20s. There was a young guy he was an OG. I think he was a drug dealer. He was like this assassin in the community, and he got shot up multiple times. Ooh. And he was probably either around the same age as me or maybe a little bit younger, but he was in his 20s and I was in my 20s at the time. And I still remember how his face looked. This guy was shot multiple times. He was sprayed up and his body was almost like this crimson color because there was blood that was streaking down his face. There was blood that was coating his chest. We stripped off all his clothes because he lost all his vital signs, and what we call a 000, so no blood pressure, no heart rate, and not breathing. And as a part of that resuscitation, we intubated him. We put in chest tubes. We actually did not even chest. We did a thoracotomy, which we wound up opening up his chest to see what his heart looked like, to see if he had blood around his chest, see if he had blood around his the pericardial sac, which was preventing his heart from pumping blood throughout the rest of his body. The thoracotomy wasn't successful, but I still remember every intricate detail of what he looked like. And it was haunting. It was one of those images that I tried to tuck away, but I couldn't. Like, I still remember, like, he had a goatee, and it was like it didn't connect. And so we already figured he was probably like in his early 20s to mid 20s. Remember the Game? It was the rapper The Game.
Yes.
He I think his first single that came out, or one of the early singles. And he said, I was an OG in the hood before I turned 22. Mm-hmm. And I always thought about that line because this is a guy who was in his early 20s and he was considered an OG already. And now this guy was lifeless. I didn't know this person's story. Mm-hmm. We're just looking at him as like another person who's coming in shot and trying to keep him alive. But there was a background story to him. So who was he before he had all this trauma?
Yeah.
What events took place that would prompt you even to have to become this OG and take on this moniker and have to protect yourself and have to wreak havoc in the community that you're from? Like, who were you before all that stuff took place? And so I'm always wondering, about that case, but I never forgot it. And so I always, whenever I do readings and stuff of the book, I always tell that story because it was so impactful. And I think that was one of the earliest stories I ever wrote for the book. Mm-hmm. And I wrote it after, it was around this time. It was in 2016. I was sitting in the office, not far from here, downtown Manhattan, and I was in the TED residency offices, and I was just reflecting because so today is this is July 22nd.
Your birthday
is my birthday. Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. But my morning wake up call on my birthday in 2015 was that my mentee Willis Young was stabbed multiple times.
Oh my gosh!
And I wrote the chapter Something Exciting in 2016. At least I started in 2016. It was also around the anniversary of Willis's death. It was in July. Mm-hmm. And so I got a chance to, really reflect. I was thinking about Willis's passing and thinking about his death. And I was thinking about who he was and I knew him. I knew the beauty that he created within the community and the beauty that he was magical. Willis was one of our violence intervention specialists for our nonprofit, CAVI. And he's one of our first hirees, but he was stabbed multiple times on my birthday and then died 2 weeks later.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Gosh.
So it was crazy how he died, but I knew what he had come from, and I knew the beauty, the great work that he had done with people in the community who've been experiencing violence and trauma. And when I wrote that chapter, I thought about the guy we call him Casey. In the book, like I remember him, and I was like, man, I wonder what his story was. I wonder what would have happened if he had some sort of support systems early on. Could he have done some similar great work that Willis was doing, rather than people talking about him being like this assassin in Chicago, who's no longer with us? And so I wrote, reflected, and I poured a lot of stuff into that. But I always wanted to make sure that he was humanized rather than looking at as a menace. I think a lot of times if we're looking like a religion, in the Judeo-Christian faiths, there's people talk about good and evil,
right?
But it's really a spectrum, and I think when you have people as this person is good and this person is evil, if somebody's not good, then they have to be a villain, they have to be evil, and rather than looking at this as a series of different events that took place that caused this person to be able to even consider taking somebody else's life, to consider being an OG in a negative sense, to even to sell drugs to somebody else. There has to be some sort of other background story to it. And I wanted to make sure I told those stories and try to humanize the people, many of our victims and survivors.
How do you have so much empathy? Like, why do you care about the backstory?
Empathy actually got me in trouble. I'd like to...
Gets us all in trouble.
I like to feel like I've evolved to just have compassion rather than empathy. Because a lot of times when we're empathetic, we want to understand and identify with people's trauma and stress. We don't want to just understand, but it's the identifying and creating these trauma bonds that often take place because we're empathetic. That's when we start taking on other people's stress and their experiences in a way that can be pathologic to us. So after Willis was killed, I was being empathetic. I was identifying with everybody's pain and compartmentalizing emotions rather than looking, okay, you're a person who's gone through a horrendous experience, and I'm sending love and compassion your way. And because of that, I'm not taking it on because I'm still a doc. I got to solve a problem.
Yeah.
I got to keep you alive. I got to figure out your illness. But if I trauma bond with you, I start getting anxious and depressed. The stuff that we're seeing in the emergency department, I like to see myself in the same shoes, in the same situation as some of the patients. When I started looking at violence and trauma through this public health lens, I was a resident physician. I was 29 years old. Back then, homicide was the number one cause of death for Black men ages 15 to 34. Right now, homicide is the number one cause of death for Black men ages 15 to 34. And looking at trauma and violence through this lens was almost self-preservation. It's like, okay, if I'm in the wrong place, wrong time, what are we going to do? I don't want to die because somebody, I want to die when I'm an ancient, I'm like old, antiquated family around me. And they can say, wow, he lived a great life.
Right.
Not because I got shot going to the store. When I really had this like really pivotal time. So this is in August of 2005 when I was I'm working our trauma emergency department, the same place that, that Something Exciting's chapter took place. And it was cold and it was raining and it was in the 50s. And, usually summertime in Chicago, summertime anywhere in the United States is usually hot. But summertime in Chicago, you might be looking at like 100, 105 degrees, and the hottest days of the summer are usually the most violent. But this day, there was nothing going on. And I'm on 24-hour call, sleeping in the emergency department or in our trauma emergency department's call room. And one of my coworkers said that he was bored because there were no cases coming in. It might have been like somebody who was in a car crash. And then a bunch of people in the room chimed in and said, yeah, we're bored. And then he said, I hope something exciting comes in. And then a bunch of people chimed in and said that they want something exciting to come in because that means you're going to get penetrating trauma, not just somebody in a car accident, but penetrating trauma, because penetrating trauma means you're probably going to wind up going to the operating room. You're going to put in a chest tube if somebody got sliced up and they got a $150 scar on the side of their face. You're going to sew them up. If they can't breathe because they've been shot in the chest or stabbed in the chest, they're going to get a chest tube. They're going to get intubated. You do a thoracotomy. You do all sorts of different procedures that are kind of coveted in the emergency department. You kind of get bragging rights, but people are looking to do these procedures not just because you get to save somebody's life. You're doing these procedures almost because you feel like you're experimenting on somebody.
Right.
Like we need to know how to do this stuff. If you're a doc, you got to be able to save somebody's life. If you're an emergency doc, if you're a trauma surgeon, you got to be able to save somebody's life. If you're a psychiatrist, by the way, shout out to Dr. Cassandra.
That's right. Yes.
And Dr. Fitzgerald, who you know. But you have to be able to understand people's thoughts and emotions if you're a psychiatrist. If I don't know how to do these life-saving procedures, at least know how to orchestrate the production to make sure this stuff happens, people lose their lives. But I started thinking, I was like, dang, if I'm in the wrong place, wrong time, if I get shot, I get stabbed, I'm on the west side of Chicago, I'm on the south side of Chicago, which is where our patients were coming from. Are people going to look at me as something exciting if I have to come in the emergency department? And I started looking at, and really thinking about what would happen if we made sure that people didn't have to become patients.
Right.
And started looking at violence and trauma through this public health lens. And so if you think of a public health problem, if you understand risk factors for that problem and you intervene with those risk factors, and you can kind of start and reverse engineering all the causality, you can fix this problem and eradicate it almost like a disease, like you were doing for any other major infectious disease that we've eradicated around the world. And so that kind of started my journey with looking at violence, doing the work with violence intervention and doing the work understanding trauma, and eventually it led me to creating a program. It was really tied to self-preservation. And if you're working in a place that you live, if you're working in a place that's connected to your family and connected to your community, the patients and the people that you see and care for are people that you know. Like my neighbors come to the emergency department where I work. When I was in Chicago, and my dad grew up on the west side of Chicago and was born at Cook County Hospital. I got family in Brooklyn. I take care of relatives. I take care of neighbors. I take care of the cousins and the family members. I take care of classmates. I went to elementary school across the street from my emergency department. So I've taken care of this cadre of people that I've been connected to in some shape, form, or fashion. And it's a little bit different when you have a connection to people, rather than looking at somebody as a science experiment or as a medical record number, where you understand that you're trying to fix a problem, but if I screw something up, if I treat somebody inhumanely, without compassion, I'm gonna hear about it when I go home. They're gonna call me. I'm gonna get the text messages. I'm gonna get the calls, and it's not even just you're gonna get the calls from them. It's gonna be grandmas and moms and like your mom's friends and people like that, and they're gonna make you feel really, really bad because you weren't helping their loved one be at their most optimal state.
Yeah.
So that's the shortest version of it. Background story. Yeah. My mother's a retired teacher and taught in pre-gentrified Brooklyn for many years. And her whole thing was, how do I help these students who come from these different challenging situations? How do I bring the best out of them? My father is a community organizer, but he started out in radio. He's television, radio,
this is
and
awesome.
production. And when he was 16, 17 years old, he went to a retreat in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Got him out the hood in Chicago, and he was like, I'm trying to get out of here. And the retreat was put on by the Chicago Freedom Movement. So Dr. King was a part of that. Reverend C.T. Vivian was a part of that. C.T. Vivian actually became my dad's mentor. But my dad met Dr. King when he was in high school. And came back home to the west side of Chicago talking about community organizing on a larger scale and community transformation. But he's always had these interests in television and media, and because my dad is 78, and back in the 50s and 60s, we didn't see folks of color really shown at their best. And he said, I want to tell those stories. I want to do television and media. He said he wanted to do radio. That's how he started. Eventually he did television. But he said, I want to make sure I'm in a position to show our people at their best. And so a lot of these lessons that come from learning how to tell stories and share these stories is stuff that I've learned. If I didn't hear these stories, I wouldn't be doing this. I don't know anything different other than doing community work, because this is the stuff that my parents did. It's a lot of conversations we're having at dinner. It's like, okay, well, what happened over here? Why do you think these things are happening in the world?
Those are questions they would ask you?
These are stuff, we just have these dialogues. My dad was doing, he was doing voter registration. Even while he was doing television, he's doing voter registration.
How young were you when they had these conversations?
I don't remember not having it. So my earliest book, think about like books for your kids.
Right.
And, I had the Dr. Seuss books, I had the Richard Scarry books, but one of my favorite books was, I had a kid book on Dr. King. So I know I had at least be 4 years old when I had that book. And I carried it around. And when I was in first grade, I had all these Black History comics. So I have comics on Toussaint L'Ouverture. So when I was in the first grade, I learned about the Haitian Revolution. I knew about Malcolm X. I knew about Norbert Rilou. I knew about Robert Smalls. I knew about Alexander Pushkin. I knew about the Three Musketeers. I didn't know the brother was Black. I had no idea about his whole story. I didn't know any. What's his name? Alexander Pushkin. That was one of my favorites. So I had all these comics and stuff that I was reading as a little kid. And so you're learning the stories about revolution and change and transformation with people who look like you. And when you start envisioning yourself in these roles, not necessarily as the protagonist or the hero, but really, okay, this is what these people did. This is how they changed their communities. And so I got to do something that's tied to the community. And, my mother's asking me questions. She's encouraging me to read and asking very critical questions. Oh, what do you think this person is doing? What are they doing in the pictures? And my dad's a photographer. And so I'm studying his photographs because I know I'd be diagnosed with ADHD if I was born right now. And you got to figure out ways to keep your kid occupied.
Right.
And I loved images. I loved words. I loved stories. My mother went to school. She grew up upstate New York in Buffalo, but had a chance to travel all over the world when she was in college. Like, she went to school in Kenya. She went to school in Mexico in college, and she was there during the time of Jomo Kenyatta being president. When she was passing through. She was in Kenya when Dr. King was assassinated. This is 1968.
Wow.
She was in Nigeria during the Biafra War, traveling back to the United States. And so I'm hearing all these stories, and I'm like, okay, I know I got to travel. I know I got to connect with people. I know I have to experience the world. And I think listening to these stories, it made it possible, because I'm like, oh, my parents did this stuff, so I can do this stuff. Mom's traveled all around the world as a black lady in the 1960s. Oh, it should be no big thing for me to travel. And when she would tell these stories, they weren't scary. So it was almost like you're listening to an adventure. It's like, okay, all right, so I'm going to go to Kenya.
That impacted you.
Impacted me. I went to Kenya. So I studied in Kenya. I worked in Kenya in Kenyatta National Hospital, which is a part of the University of Nairobi. That's the same place my mother went, and where she studied in the 1960s, in 67 to 68. And, so these stories that we tell, you don't think your kid is listening, but they listen.
I was going to ask, obviously you're doing such great work. What can we do as parents to have this kind of impact on our kids?
I think we have to.
Look at the great work that you're doing and how much you're crediting your parents. I want to know I'm on the right path with our daughter.
I think about this stuff all the time. I'm like, dang, is my kid heading on this pathway?
Yes.
And I think we have to be intentional. And some of the things I'm learning now, because my kid can have spicy moments, and he's got a lot of energy, and sometimes you don't want to take them certain places.
Yes.
You'd be like, it's gonna be faster if I do it, but you can't. You have to allow them to go through these different developmental milestones, and some of these milestones are also engaging with you and your peers, and you have to show them what to do. And in the days of our ancestors, and I'm going to have to get ancestral. We can go back to our parents' generation, our grandparents' generation, people who we had some sort of contact with. They passed on insight to us. It might be through language. It might be through cooking and cuisine. It might be understanding their experiences during the time of civil war in their respective countries, or civil rights movement. And they're sharing their stories. They're talking about what it was like when we were kids. And then you're learning from those stories. I just happen to be, born into a family where my dad did activism work and community organizing work. And I always wanted to learn about what he did. And he was interested in sharing those stories with me without being, without blowing me away. If I'm asking 1,000 questions, he might start slowing his voice down and be like, okay, yes, Rob. Okay, yes, this is what happened. This is what took place. My mother was also very patient with me, telling these stories. And I think once you start seeing that your kid is starting to connect dots, then you go, oh, wow, I have to do more of this. Like last night, so, I was reading, there's a book, Marvin K. Mooney. It's a Dr. Seuss book. I remember my parents reading Marvin K. Mooney. It was a crazy thing. My kid actually sat still to listen to the book. And I'm like, oh, wow, I remember this same moment where my mother was reading Marvin K. Mooney, and I'm talking about the old blue shoe. And I'm reading this stuff, and I'm excited about reading it because it's nostalgic. And my kid is excited because I'm reading it because I'm excited about doing it, rather than, I hate this stuff. I hate this. I don't want to do this. I'm doing this only because I love you. It's like, no, bring your kid and engage them with your passions. I like working out. I like moving and stuff like that. So my kid is in the park. He's in the dirt. I like being out in the elements. My kid is out in the elements. My kid embraces every single known element that's come on this face of this planet. And so he's probably going to be an outdoorsy kid because he thrives in it and he gets balance from that. But I think he's also like that because I get excited when I go out in those spaces. So we got to share our passions.
Do you have conversations like your parents did with you, like critical thinking with your son now who's 5 already? Or are you going to take a different approach?
I do. So it's funny. I actually rehearse some of my talks with my kid. Yeah,
Like what?
He's got limited vocabulary, so he's in speech therapy right now, and he's starting to pick up some words. But like we're in the car, I'm like, sometimes I'm like, dang, is he paying attention to me or not? And I was like, you know what? I don't care if he is paying attention or not. We're gonna have this dialogue about community organizing. We're gonna have this talk about trauma and why we treat people with civility. We're gonna talk about the stuff that I've seen, maybe not the goriness of what I see in the emergency department, but I'm gonna talk about why it's important to make eye contact, why it's important to learn how to be calm and to regulate our nervous system so that we're not putting off our trauma on other people, but also allowing us to be present. And so I have these conversations. He just kind of looks at me in the back of the mirror and he's like, okay, I don't know what he's talking about, but there's a reason why we can quote our parents. And
Yes.
there's a reason why we can tell their stories verbatim. It's because they've had to, sometimes you got to tell these kids something over and over and over again. And then after, eventually they can achieve this level of mastery at reciting your stories with ease. And you're like, dang, you were paying attention. Just because a kid's not as verbal, or just because a kid's not as expressive in certain circumstances doesn't mean that they're not listening to you. How many times you roll your eyes at your parents?
But I was listening.
But you were listening.
Yes.
You'd be like, you might be doing one of these.
Yeah.
And you're definitely not going to let them catch you doing
no.
that. You get the shoe. What they call it? Because your family's from Egypt.
Yes.
Yeah. What do they call it? The chocolate. Wait. When they,
Well, it's a sandal for us.
The sandal.
Yeah, but yeah.
Every culture has it.
We call it shib.
Ship. Yeah. My mother's hit me with slippers before. She's throwing them at me and stuff. If you roll your eyes and stuff. So.
Oh, yeah.
But you're still listening.
All the time.
All the time. So I think we have to assume that our kids are listening, and we have to be very mindful and very intentional with what we say to them. I try. I mean, my work schedule is crazy, so I don't sleep as much as I probably need to. Not probably. I know I don't sleep as much as I need to. But whenever I say to my son, I try to make sure that I'm not saying it with anger, even if I am angry with him. It doesn't mean that you don't express those emotions, but I want to make sure that I can articulate things in a way that might be clear and with a sense of compassion that I know he's a little person. I know he doesn't understand why he's doing these things. He might be dysregulated. He might be tired. He might have had a rough day. I don't know if he had a rough day because he hasn't told me he's had a rough day. So there are all these assumptions. So I'm looking at it's like, okay, how would you want to be treated on the worst day of your life?
I love that.
And bring that compassion and bring some of those stories and share some of your insights. And eventually they may start learning this stuff. It's probably gonna hit him where he's gonna start quoting me when he's like 10 or 12 or maybe 20. My parents didn't realize I was paying attention. My dad said something, we were doing a talk together. He was like, hell, I didn't know he was paying attention to me. I was just saying it because I needed to say it because he needed to sit still or do what he was supposed to do. I didn't realize he was listening.
That's funny. Tell us about CAVI. You founded CAVI. What is it? What does it stand for? And why is the work important?
CAVI is the Kings Against Violence Initiative. It's also a Sanskrit word that means thinker, doer, and poet. And it's a hospital, school, and community-based violence intervention and prevention program that I founded back in 2009. In our hospital program, we work with people who are patients because somebody comes in shot or stabbed. Many of them come back. About 40 to 50% of people who were injured due to violence are going to come back within 5 years with another violent injury. And the rate of them being killed is as high as 20% within 5 years after that initial injury.
Oh my gosh.
And so we want to make sure that we have a brave space and a safe space that allows people to be able to process that trauma. In doing so, we do case management. We have intervention team members that are going to help do mediations. They're also going to be an advocate for the patient because after, think about, you all are both mothers. When you're in pain and you're tired, you need somebody that's a part of your team to help you through these challenging times as a brand new mother.
Right.
Especially if you're post-op C-section and, post vaginal delivery, you need a support system. Trauma patients are no different. But we have a different kind of compassion in some circumstances with new mothers. But when you have somebody who's been shot or stabbed, we don't always look at them the same. We look at them as villains. It's like, you shouldn't have been there.
Right.
You shouldn't have been in that situation. You should have stayed clear of that. Yes, you probably should have, but Were you able to? Were you in the wrong place, wrong time? Are you carrying weapons because your sense of safety has been compromised? You know, I carried razor blades to school when I was, starting at age 11 up to the age of 18 because I got jumped when I was 11 years old. And I was like, I'm not going to be taken advantage of. And I was a nerdy kid. I was this big. I wouldn't hurt anybody. I didn't like conflict, but I wanted to be safe. And so there are a lot of people who carry weapons who wind up getting in situations. They get involved in gang and gang culture because they're trying to create a sense of community that can protect them in dangerous circumstances. Unfortunate thing, because you're dealing with stuff and you're dealing with activities that may not necessarily be legal, or you're fighting for things that are important to you, but not really important in the grand scheme of things. Once you are able to reflect on that, and because you're doing these activities and trying to protect yourself and protecting turf, you wind up getting injured, even being killed as a result of violence.
Oh,
But when you can humanize people and you understand the backstories, you understand who they were before the trauma, you can understand and identify the different adverse childhood experiences that they may have gone through. We look at them very differently and we go, okay, I know what took place. And because I knew what took place before the trauma, I can figure out how to help you. And this is a lot of stuff that we do with our intervention program for our hospital intervention.
Wow.
Our school program, we have a few hundred kids in our school program. And we have a 32-week curriculum in our schools that focuses on mediation and conflict resolution and a lot of life skills development to give kids the tools and the skills to be able to navigate conflict out in the, when it happens. We know that conflict is going to happen. You can't avoid it. As people who are in partnerships, as parents, you're going to get in a conflict with your kid, your spouse, your significant other, your parents who are aging, but it doesn't have to be violent. And a lot of that, in order to do so, if you have the tools to navigate those spaces and to be able to articulate your thoughts and feelings and emotions, you don't wind up having these violent things, which is what we're trying to prevent. And we have this space that's really almost kind of group therapy where you are given an opportunity to process, kind of like here. So we may not have, really nice couches like this one right here, but, just to have somebody to hear you and say, look, I know who you are. I know that you've gone through something very challenging. I know that you need support. I am here for you. I want to listen and hear what you have to say. Tell me in a way that's non-judging, that's not going to get you kicked out of school, that's not going to get you a bad grade, that's not going to get you in trouble with your parents because your parents are like, what were you thinking? Why do you think like that? Parents are in protective mode, but in many instances, kids and adults, we need to be in respite and processing mode because we got to process the emotions and the traumas that we've gone through. And then we do community work too. We have a couple of public housing units that we work with in Brooklyn. And we also do healing circles for people who've experienced trauma. We have an amazing, amazing team. I got to give a shout out to our executive directors, Ramik Williams and Anthony Bouchereth, who've been doing incredible work, taking the helm as the co-executive directors. And we have other staff members who are running the different aspects of our program. We have people who are participants, people who used to be patients, people who were participants in our school program who are also working with us. And so we have an amazing team of people who are dedicated to ensuring that the community is going to be at their best.
Where can people learn more and or help?
Oh, wow. They can check us out at kavibrooklyn.org. So KAVIBROOKLYN.org. They can check us out on our website. They can contact us through the website itself, and we'll get back to them if they're interested. We do everything from teacher trainings to community events. We've got our school programs, and we're always looking to expand the school programs. And we're also in the process of expanding our hospital intervention programs to move beyond where we're working at Kings County Hospital because we know that there's a need. I wish we didn't have to do this work. I wish my goal is to have our organization become obsolete because if it's obsolete, that means we've done our job and you've got a community and you've got a world that's been healed of violent trauma. Yeah. But that's not the case. Right. And because it's not the case, we've got to really strengthen our support systems and our networks. There are a lot of other people who do very similar work in different mediums. And sometimes it's as simple as having a different kind of dialogue. The beauty of this space right here, when the work that you and Katrina have been doing, it gives people a voice. It allows them to articulate, things that they've experienced, and it also, helps connect the dots with people who do want to get involved and people who do want to get connected, who may be in spaces that they don't see this stuff. There are a lot of ways that people can provide in-kind support for organizations and people doing community change work, even on the business level. So it might be, I had a conversation with, I did a talk earlier this afternoon around 1:00. And when I was talking with one of the representatives from the group, as a corporate space, and they were like, oh, we do a lot of volunteering with our staff and staff members, they always want to get involved in volunteering. I said, volunteering doesn't always have to be hands-on with students. It may be infrastructure development to allow an organization, or whether it's a for-profit, nonprofit, it could be a B Corps that's doing community change work, but they don't have, the finances may not be optimal. They don't have a board of directors that they need more board members to join them. They need people who can help balance their books as accountants.
Right.
They need legal representation for some of their clients. They need somebody who's a marketing whiz and a marketing genius who can help build out a strategy that allows people to know exactly the work that they're doing. There are so many different ways that people can be of help. It doesn't always have to be, I'm the teacher. If you kind of consider what goes on in a school, you've got the principal, you've got the teachers, you've got the paraprofessionals, you've got the superintendent, you've got the therapist, you've got the housekeeping and janitorial staff, you've got the cooks, you've got the school safety officers, you've got school aides. There's an entire, and you've got the kids.
Right.
You have an entire ecosystem in this building that needs support. And so how do you support the different elements of community groups and what's most vulnerable within their organization? Some people might be the financing, and they're like, look, we're about to close, we're about to shut shop down because we don't have enough money to make payroll for our staff. I've been there. I understand. It's like when somebody's going through with a startup, and you have people who have come to our rescue and have helped support us in different ways that allow our organization to continue to grow.
With your experience, generally speaking, what are 3 things somebody can do when they're trying to navigate conflict in a healthy way? And you would say these 3 things you should try focusing on.
3 things that I think should be important for when you're engaging in conflict. The first thing is, why are we in conflict? That's one thing, because sometimes people don't even know why they're in conflict. And number 2 is, what is the problem that we're trying to tackle as we navigate this space of conflict? Is it we want to achieve a level of peace? Do we want to be cordial? Do we want to get our money back from somebody who owes us money?
Right.
What is that? And then the last but not least is, how do we prevent this from happening in the future? So it's almost like this engineering design process way of thinking, where you're looking at, what's the problem I'm trying to tackle? What are some ideas that we can use to brainstorm how to tackle this problem? How do we implement something in place, almost like a prototype or a pilot, in the TV and radio realm? What's the pilot going to look like? And then once you've launched it, it's like, okay, what did we do well? What did we not do well? How do we do this better, stronger, faster, and a lot more efficiently? And really looking at the evolution of how we navigate the space of conflict as a dynamic system that's going to be ongoing, because how you dealt with conflict 15, 20 years ago is not going to be how you're dealing with it now. How you dealt with it before social media is very different now that you have social media. So you have to constantly evolve your way. You can't say, oh, we fixed this conflict a while ago. It's like, no, you're constantly working on it. Like, you're constantly healing, you're constantly growing, you're constantly evolving, you're constantly putting in that energy and effort to ensure that these conflicts don't develop in the future. But you have to consider the perspective and the viewpoints of who's most vulnerable in that group. Conflict is very different when you're in that position of power.
That's right.
And you've got another group that doesn't have the same kind of power. But what's going to allow for an equitable discussion to occur, and looking through the lens of who's the most vulnerable, not who's trying to take over. Because a lot of times people are in conflict because they want to take over.
Right.
They're trying to subdue and conquer.
That's right.
Rather than establish a really healthy, thriving ecosystem. And if we kind of look at it through that vantage point, what's required for us to thrive in this relationship, and not really looking at it. I did a talk a few weeks ago and we talked about conflict engagement and trauma. And it's like, okay, well, what does it look like in order for us to thrive? What is this ecosystem? What is this relationship? What does a thriving relationship look like? We can't look at the relationship or this dynamic from occurring. I know I gave you more than 3.
No,
but,
I love it. I love it.
But what does it look like in the most optimal state? We know what it looks like, in this crazy, terrible state, but what does it look like in this most optimal state? And we use that as the framework to establish, okay, well, what are the things that we need to implement to allow this optimization to occur? And if we're looking at through the lens of conflict, to say, okay, everybody had all the things that they needed to thrive. There was food, they had clothing, they had shelter, they had security, they had family, they had adequate health care. Those are some of our social determinants of health. We had all that stuff. But now that we got this conflict, the groups that are warring, you've got one group that has all the things that are required for them to survive, and the other group doesn't. Of course, there's going to be a conflict because that group that's vulnerable is trying to get access to those resources so they can stay alive. We're not even thinking about thriving. Right. So if most conflicts occur, if you're looking at global conflicts that are occurring, which is not that much different than a lot of stuff we're seeing in the hood, or we're seeing in areas that are underdeveloped. Because we're seeing a lot of violence that are taking place in the suburbs because populations are getting displaced and moving around. Most of the people don't have the things that are essential for their survivability. If you can't survive, how can you even think straight? If you're wondering where your meal is going to come from, and selling drugs, selling crack, or selling weed, and in a place where weed's not legal, if that's a way for you to be able to live, then you're going to do that because survival mechanisms, kick in. But if people have all their essential stuff, then you're good money. Then you can look at really fixing the problem in a way that's going to allow this thriving ecosystem to occur.
In your career, have you ever cried in the emergency room?
All the time.
Really? And do your patients see it? Have they ever seen you cry?
They have, and I've cried with them in certain circumstances. That is the evolved person. I have to say, 10 years ago, when Willis was killed, I wasn't really crying with patients. I might have a weepy moment privately, but I would compartmentalize my emotions. When he was killed, there was another person who came in. So the night of Willis's funeral, I was working in our critical care and trauma emergency department. I didn't take a break. I was working, and I'm talking to family members. There were family who were connected to Willis, people on our block who were connected to him, people in our organization, because he grew up on the block I lived on. And I'd known all these different people, and I never took a break. The night of his funeral, I worked. I broke down in his funeral, but I'm working in our critical care space. And in that emergency department, there was a kid who came in who was shot multiple times.
Oh my God.
And he was in stable condition, or he was in serious condition, I should say. But I met him before. I met him because I pronounced his little brother dead. His little brother was shot and killed by the police department. And I saw the mother. And there was a point where, the mother recognized me. I used to have locks, and I cut them back in 2014. And the mother recognized me. She said, "I know who you are. You cut your hair." And, she remembered me because you remember these things. I told her that her teenage son was killed. And when and she eventually found out he was killed by the police. And I am having this conversation about her other son who's been shot multiple times, who's in serious condition, and she already lost another one. And I'm the connecting piece. And she asked me, this is a kid who came in alive and who wound up dying in our emergency department. And there was one point where I was, talking to her about the status of her son, who was our current patient, and she looks at me. And she was calm at first. Then all of a sudden she looks at me. She said, "Did my other son say anything to you before he died?" And I got chills because this is a kid who said, "Don't let me die." And,
oh my gosh.
And I said, "I don't know. I got to go." And I ran out of the patient room, and I ran into the bathroom, and I'm having dry heaves, and I'm having a panic attack. I'm crying. I'm sweating, and I'm working. I still have about 6-7 hours left in my shift in the emergency department to work in the critical care space. And I was having panic attacks. And I knew what they were because I've taken care of them before. But I was a person who was really the patient. And I was having the same panic attacks when I would come to the hospital, like over the course of like a week or 2 weeks. I'm having the dry heaves, and when I'm walking up the ambulance ramp, so I'm processing Willis's death. This lady, asked me, about me, saying, did her son have any last words? And he did.
Goodness.
And it was overwhelming because I never processed the trauma and the stress that I had been dealing with as a practitioner, as a friend, as a mentor, and all this stuff just kind of, worked itself up to a head. And I can't work and be present if I'm a patient. And so I decided I was going to go to therapy. And when I was in therapy, the first question the therapist asked me, and we were sitting on the couch, kind of like this, and I think it was actually Blue. And she said, "Why do you think this keeps happening?" And I was kind of dumbfounded. And then she said, "I think your problem is empathy." And I'm looking at her like she was crazy because, we've been taught to be empathetic and be able to understand people and identify. But a lot of the problem wasn't in understanding, it was identifying, because we were trying to create these trauma bonds with people. Sometimes you're like, I know what you mean. I know how you feel. I know how you feel. You don't know how they feel, but you're trying to force yourself to feel like that. And you're creating this connection. And I've been doing that throughout my career. And when Willis died, when he was killed, I lost it. And I at that point, I didn't know how to regulate my nervous system anymore. And she said, your job as a physician, as somebody in this position, is to take care of people's lives. But you need to be compassionate. You need to show love, but you don't need to take on other people's stress. I guess there has to be a level of protection that you have between you and the clients that you're caring for. It doesn't mean that you don't care, but it just means that I'm not going to connect with you on a trauma bond level, because I don't need to have this transference of energy to me, which is going to affect my ability to care for other people.
Wow.
And I can't do that if I'm not present. So she said, show compassion, show love. And I haven't had any issues since then. And since then, when patients have had to cry because there was something that was horrendous going on, I've cried with them. I've shed tears. I've given them hugs. And I felt like I've been able to do that since I kind of learned that, how to express the emotions. This is the culmination of a lot of work, a lot of therapy, a lot of processing, a lot of martial arts, a lot of meditation, but just growing and figuring out ways to, like, how do we connect with people in ways that are meaningful? How do I share my experiences without feeling like I have to take on your experience? How do we grow? In judo, I just came from my judo academy around the corner. Shout out to Kano. And like how we always talk about mutual benefit. When you have a training partner, is your training partner benefiting from this sparring session, this training session? And I think the same thing applies when you're engaging with patients and having a dialogue and communication with patients. How are they benefiting from your expertise? How are they nourishing something in you to satisfy your need as somebody who's in a helping profession? And I think being present allows me to do that. When we start having the anxiety and the depression, it's because we're not being present. We're having these thoughts and emotions and these physical manifestations based on this trigger for something that took place a long time ago or something that hasn't happened yet.
Right.
And so, just being present itself. And so this overall concept of just being mindful whenever we have these engagements with people allows me not to take on the trauma and the stress and be able to help them as best as possible.
That's heavy. You became a father too during the pandemic, right?
Yeah, I became a father during the pandemic.
And I remember reading about that you were still doing your ER shifts while your wife was pregnant. Now, what was that time like in the ER and then having to go home amidst that to your pregnant wife? Were you like afraid that you were going to get her sick?
Oh, that was a crazy time.
Yeah.
I moved out the house during the pandemic. So I left that. My wife was pregnant. She was in her second trimester, and I moved out for 10 weeks. Me and one of my other good friends, shout out to Dr. Maurice Selby. He's another ER doc. He's down in Atlanta now, but his wife was in her first trimester. And our hospital was one of the earliest hospitals to see COVID cases in New York City. And at first it was like maybe, I was one of the early attendings. I was one of the first attendings to see a COVID patient. And at that time, only attending the supervising docs were the only ones seeing the COVID cases. And these folks were super sick. They were like ICU level kind of care. And it's like, man, this is scary. And every day they were doubling, tripling, quadrupling, and to the point that we're seeing stuff. And every day we're learning more about the disease process. And I'm like, my wife is pregnant. Actually, one of our coworkers, one of my good friends, Jaquel Clemens Moore, shout out to Jaquel. Jaquel was our chief operating officer for Kavi. She was also pregnant with her second child, and she and I grew up. We went to college together in Atlanta. She went to Clark Atlanta. I was at Morehouse, and so I've known her for a long time, and we could be very candid. So she's like, Rob, you're not bringing this crap home to your wife. She's like, you know what's going on with this thing? That's right. I think you need to move out. You gonna move out? And I'm like, yeah.
Got it.
And so I booked the Airbnb. I wound up moving out the house for 10 weeks because we were so scared about what we were seeing. Every day we're seeing a new manifestation and complication due to COVID. And we didn't know how it was going to impact, women who were pregnant. We didn't know how it was going to impact kids. And so I figured, as an emergency worker, as a frontline worker, I was like, I got to move out. I can't abandon the job and say, oh, okay, well, I'm just not going to practice. It's like, I kind of, set an oath to be able to do this kind of work. And if we stop doing this work, what does that mean for other people? And so my wife, she understood. My wife. Wow. Shout out to my wife for this amazing woman, super strong, and she's like, you need to go out and take care of patients. You got to take care of this. We had family my wife's from Ethiopia, and she had family members who couldn't get back to Ethiopia. Our cousin Mimi was in school at St. John's, and so she got put out the dorms at St. John's and came to live with us. And so my wife had somebody with her.
Goodness.
Okay. And I felt like, whew, I don't have to talk to my wife through an N95 mask for an ungodly amount of time. And so we had support for her. And so I could take care of patients. And, it was hard because, when I would go visit, I was living like around the corner, like about, anywhere from like a 5-minute bike ride, 10-minute bike ride away. So I could get to the house, in no time to see her, but it's hard to see my wife in a greater distance than where we're sitting right now. So I'm sitting like where Tony's at right now. So what's about like 10, 12 feet. So I'm probably about 10, 12 feet with a N95 mask because I was so freaked out. I'm sanitizing, changing clothes. I was wearing the hazmat suits. I'll show you some pictures. Yeah. I have like the Halo suit with the Papper mask with the electrical motor on the side, looking like something like from some sort of Star Wars sci-fi movie. So it was crazy. And we were seeing people who were dying every day, sometimes like this. You hear code, what do they call it? Code 99, and you're always hearing these codes and somebody coding on the floors. And so it was a hard time. I meditated a lot. I prayed a lot. I worked out a lot because, I have nothing else to do. And, as an essential worker, I could get out the house. So I'm going on runs. I was meditating. I had weights.
Yeah.
I got to give shout out to the folks from Physical Culture. It used to be OPEX. They gave me kettlebells. Those are my trainers. They gave me kettlebells. So I'm lifting weights and I'm doing all the stuff to figure out how to regulate my system because I'm going through an ungodly amount of stress and nobody else, unless they were working there, could understand. Right. But I wasn't stressed because I wasn't having a lot of conversations with people about what was going on. I would talk to some of my colleagues.
Right.
Maurice, was my roommate. We were lifting weights, we were training. And so, we're doing like 1.5, 2-hour meditation sessions. And so I felt like, okay, I'm developing, this capacity to deal with and respond to stress. I felt like I was evolving. I wasn't gonna be like Super Saiyan kind of thing.
Right.
But I felt like I was learning how to adapt to a lot of the stress. And it's, I've taken those practices and continued them. And so I feel like I can be calm in a lot of these situations now because I've gone through that adversity. I've gone through, what they call allostasis, which is, our body's ability to respond and adapt to stressful situations. I've gone through that and I've had the periods of time to be able to process it.
And learn to regulate.
So
it's like muscle memory at this point, right?
It is. People talk about like in martial arts, they say like the path is the practice. Meditation is a practice. You got to keep doing it. Being a parent is a practice. It is a path. It's a practice. and you're not gonna get better at it unless you do it.
That's it.
You're gonna have those spicy moments with your kid. You know, you're gonna want, you be like, you know, it has to be this love that you have between you and your child and your significant other, because they're gonna drive you up the wall. They're gonna say things to push your buttons. You're gonna be like, you lucky I love y'all. you know, but you have to be intentional with it, and you have to keep doing it, and you have to want to do it, and you have to want to work at it and want to get better at it. If not, it's going to consume you. And I'm in a situation, you know, our kids need us. They need us to be around. You know, I'm not doing, you know, trying to have as many any toxic habits, because I'm trying to be there for my kid and help him grow to a point that he can be self-sufficient and independent and be able to contribute to society in a very meaningful way. That is my job as a parent. So I have to be around. I can't be hemmed up with, you know, breathing issues, with, you know, big old belly, because I can't move around. I feel like I have to optimize my physical and mental health, because I have somebody I'm trying to bring into this crazy world. Not trying to bring into this crazy world, and helping them figure out how to navigate as best as possible.
I want some parenting advice from your lens, from an ER doctor, okay? What are some tips for us as parents when we go to the ER? How can we make it a more pleasurable or just more tolerable situation?
The first thing is, you have to know who you are. Are you an anxious person? Are you not an anxious person?
Good question.
The reason, and there's a method to this bit of madness.
Yes, tell us.
If you're an anxious, I mean, every parent, when they go into the emergency department because you're worried about your kid being well and not being at their best, or even concerned about life-threatening things, you're going to be nervous. I think a lot of, even in the ER as a physician, I still get nervous when I see cases coming in. I just know how to contain it, and I know how to navigate that space. But you have to know who you are. The second, you have to have an advocate. And that advocate may be a friend, it might be a family member, it may be somebody who is calm under pressure. They need to either be with you or help you write down a list of questions that you want to ask your doc.
Colin. That's who it is for me.
Ask them beforehand, because everything changed. When you're at home and you're worried about something, you're in your comfort zone. It's like, okay, I'm on my nice blue couch. I'm in a place that I know where everything is. And I want to write down all the questions. If it's life-threatening, you got to get to the emergency department, you call 911, that's a very different thing. In that case, bring an advocate with you who can help you navigate that space. But if you're about to go to the hospital, write out those questions, because once you set foot in that ER, and that's not your regular place that you spend time in, your heart rate goes up, you're breathing fast, you get sweating, you got sweaty pits and stuff like that. Your memory goes blank. You got, mommy brain, daddy brain. That stuff becomes, augmented to the nth degree.
Right.
So write out those questions that you want to ask your healthcare provider about your child's care beforehand. And because when you at least have those questions, when you ask those questions, it may prompt other series of questions. But like, we all have notes. When you see something and you're going to go off cuff, but at least you have a template. So if you forget something, you go, oh, by the way, I forgot to ask this question.
Yes.
My job as a doc is to make sure that y'all don't come back.
Right.
And I tell patients, I told a lady the other day, I was like, I don't mind you. I would love for you to come back just to say hi and to say thank you. I don't want you coming back because we missed something, because we failed to diagnose something, because we failed to treat your injury or your illness, and now all of a sudden your life and well-being is compromised.
Right.
So I want to make sure you have all that those lists of questions. And then the last thing I would probably say is have a running list of people who you are connected to that are in healthcare. I should not even, who is your list of helpful people? And this can be applicable to healthcare, it can be applicable to education. It's all the same thing. You got to have an advocate as a parent when your kid is in school. So, having a friend or family member who's a teacher, an educator, you have to be able to talk to them, ask them questions about learning and reading and speech and communication. And bouncy kids and kids who got a whole lot of energy. You got to have somebody who can do that. You want to make sure that you have somebody in medicine or healthcare who you can ask these questions. They may help you craft the question. You have producers here for this show,
right? That
you can bounce ideas off of and be like, okay, how do I make this language appropriate for my guest?
Right.
So because if you can make the language appropriate, you shorten the amount of time that's required for that engagement period. If you shorten that time, then you can get a lot more out of that discussion. And the same thing happens in medicine. You figure out what the vocabulary is. You have your friends that can articulate and help you figure out that vocabulary because they're in medicine and healthcare. That shortens the amount of questions, or that shortens the amount of time spent in that dialogue, and you can get a lot more out of that situation.
Makes sense. Yeah. What are 3 things we can do to avoid going to the ER?
Develop an exercise practice.
Okay.
And if you don't know, get somebody on that list of helpful people.
What does that mean?
List of helpful people or exercise practice?
Yeah, the
exercise practice.
Exercise practice is going to be very different depending on who we are. I'm somebody who has ADHD, so I have to work out regularly. I work out anywhere between 4 to 7 times a week, and it may be different. Some days I'm on the mats doing jujitsu or doing judo. If I can't get to class, I might be using the bands to practice throwing people. I might go for a run. I might do pull-ups and dips in the park and have my resistance bands. I have a backpack that has metal plates that I can ruck so I can give some extra resistance. It's very different for me. Some people it might be if you've never worked out before, it might be just walking. As parents, your job. I feel like, how do you keep up with your kid? That's gonna be your cardio test. And it might if you're wearing crazy shoes, if you're wearing flip flops, and you got a boy or you got an active little girl, that's probably not the best attire for you to do that. You're not gonna get a workout,
right?
But if you know your kid is rough and they're gonna be running around back and forth, throwing some sneakers, throwing a jersey, throwing some sweatpants. I could always tell who the boy moms are in the park because they all got ponytails and got super short hair.
Right.
Because they know they're going to go to the park for a workout.
Yes.
But, I think our objectives are to be able to at least get in the level of shape that you can play adequately, not more than adequately, optimally play with your child.
I love that.
If you can't, then you might need to start at a very different space. You might have to start with walking and doing simple things. We all have our different sets of challenges that we have. Some of us have physical handicaps and physical challenges. Some of us are recovering from injuries. We're recovering from surgeries. We may be super exhausted because our kid woke up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning because they took a late nap, and you don't have the capacity to engage. And so it's like, I want to do an activity, but I need to do an activity in a contained space. So that's when you go for the indoor playgrounds that have locked gates rather than going out into the playground. Because if your kid darts off and you're tired, you're not going to catch that kid.
Right.
and you might have to bring somebody with you as a part of your support system. But, get in shape, figure out your diet, your dietary needs. Your dietary needs and also your physical needs in terms of working out are all tied to your body's neurological system. Do you need a lot of high impact stuff to regulate your nervous system so you can actually be calm and be present, or do you need a lot, or do you need a little? My kid needs a lot. He needs a lot of activity. He's in trampoline and in the ninja park for 6 hours a day. Now he's probably good. I know he's asleep now because the baby cam didn't go off. Right. So he's probably sleeping good right now. Some kids don't need that same kind of input. Some parents don't need that same kind of input. And then we said physical health in terms of working out, a working out practice. Number 2, eating properly and figuring out what your dietary requirements are that are going to help put you in the most optimal state of health. And then number 3 is your mental health practice. And that mental health practice can be rooted in anything from meditation, some sort of spiritual foundation, something that's going to allow your body to shut down and be present. Some people who, some people may be able to sit still and do a meditation. Some people say, I can't meditate because my thoughts are, they're racing. It's like, well, that's the whole purpose of meditation. You want to become this watcher where you can see your thoughts. And if you can see your thoughts and see what's happening, and you can acknowledge them, and then you can fix the stuff that you're screwing up with. If you're engaging in a lot of bad habits, you want to become that watcher, so you know which habit that is. You're basically bringing the stuff that's in your subconscious state into conscious state, and when it's conscious, you can become aware. And you become aware, you make these necessary changes. It doesn't have to be meditation. Meditation can be a walking practice. It can be a mindful practice where I'm not doing a podcast. I'm not listening to a podcast. I'm not listening to what somebody else is doing. I'm not trying to cook at the same time. I'm just going to be washing my dishes. And just that practice itself can be, just rooted in being present, focusing on the task that's at hand, the task in front of you, so you're not being clouded with all these other things and ideas. You're fully being present, but you've got to have a practice that allows you to process the things that you deal with. If you don't, it's going to consume you.
Oh man, when should a parent go straight to ER versus going to urgent care versus waiting it out?
That's an excellent question. Urgent care versus the ER versus wait it out. If you are concerned, I can't give advice over the phone. So people call the ER all the time. They go, oh, well, my kid has this, or I think I got this, and I'm not sure. I'm like, look, if you were concerned, I would say come to the emergency department. I would much rather say nothing is going on right now, and you just need to follow up in an outpatient clinic rather than missing something that was very, very critical.
Right.
I have patients who sprain their ankles who take ambulance. I have people who are having heart attacks who take the bus. I had a patient recently who tripped, hit his head on like a Wi-Fi box.
Oh my!
And while he was walking to the hospital in the middle of the night with his family member, he got hit by a car. So like all sorts of stuff happened. But this is an older guy who's got complex problems who dinged his head at home because he tripped, and he's walking in the middle of the night. And then you have somebody who's got a cold or an ear infection who calls an ambulance. So what people think is an emergency, can run the gamut.
Wow.
But I say, if you think it's an emergency, if you're concerned and you don't understand what's happening with your body, come in, see an expert, see a series of different people, and then move on. Urgent care, if you can't breathe, if you're feeling dizzy, if you're feeling lightheaded, if you can't function, then you need to go to the ER. If you're like, I feel great, my little finger don't feel good, or I stubbed it, you can go to urgent care. If your nose is boogery and you kind of stuffed up and you're like, I'm tired of breathing through my mouth. My mouth is dry. I'm tired of snoring, and my significant other's complaining about me snoring because I got this cold. And if you're not short of breath, if you're not feeling dizzy or lightheaded, go to the urgent care. If you in terms of waiting it out, if you have a medical background and you are 100% or 99.9% certain that you can take care of this at home, then take it home. If your kid has a cold and they're breathing okay, so then they're not breathing rapidly, they can rest properly, they are not paralyzed, they don't have, so like in case of a kid, if a kid has a temperature over like a 104 or higher, you need to go to the ER. Don't go to urgent care. If they can't breathe, if they look like they're having labored breathing, if they are altered or confused, bring them. Not cranky, but if they're altered or confused, they need to come to the emergency department. If they look like they're in distress, if you're like, something don't look right with my kid, bring him in. If you're like, oh, my kid, he's got a booger, or he's got like they always got the little booger crust, and like,
right.
and between November through April, they always got the little crust, and then April, May, they still have it because allergy season.
Right.
So if they got the little thing around there, and they look fine, and they're tearing up the house, and they're bouncing off the walls, and the pots and pans are pulled out, and they're getting on your nerves, but they're halfway pleasant, you could wait it out.
Yeah.
If not, you're like, look, something's a little bit odd, and the behavior is destructive, or they seem like they're in distress and they look like they're hurting, bring them in.
What's something every parent should do or know how to do in case of a medical emergency?
I think that's an excellent question. I think every parent should be trained in basic first aid. What to do with your kid if they're choking. What to do with your kid if their heart stops for whatever reason, and you've got to do CPR. Those are very basic things. You don't even need to know how to use a defibrillator and shock somebody. That's like advanced cardiac life support. But basic first aid, choking, problems breathing, heart stops, all those are things that you should know how to at least do administer basic CPR before somebody who's a trained emergency professional can get to you. That can be the difference between life or death. Like, how long does it take you to get to? We live in New York, and the number of hospitals and clinics and urgent care centers and emergency departments are a lot higher where we live compared to places that are a little bit more rural. because of traffic in New York. Just think about, right now in Midtown Manhattan, how long does it take you to get, even with congestion, how long is it going to take you to get from the east side to the west side?
Right.
In the middle of the day.
Right.
How long is it going to take for an ambulance person to get to you? Even though, you got a bunch of hospitals all in this area. You might, in 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and what you going to do if your kid is choking? If your kid has a food particle in their mouth and their face is turning blue, don't just be like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. How do you get that thing out? What are you supposed to do? That could be the difference between life and death. I've done the Heimlich maneuver on people. I was walking past a restaurant. It was an outdoor restaurant in Brooklyn, walking down the street, and my friends and I were going to go sit down, and there was a guy who was choking. They were like, oh man, this guy is choking, and his face was turning blue. And I taught CPR and done training programs for other people, and this guy was grabbing him, and this guy's face is turning blue. I was like, move. And I gave a few, thrusts to the, like the solar plexus area. 1, 2, 3, boom. And this piece of meat shot out of this guy. And this was like an outdoor face. It's about maybe 100 people outside there.
Oh, that's scary.
And people were kind of like, oh my gosh.
Right.
And the guy who was doing the CPR, at least he started the process. Well, he was doing the Heimlich maneuver. At least he started the Heimlich maneuver, but he didn't do it properly. Because this guy, the guy eventually, he sent me thank you stuff. He's like, oh man, thank you for saving my life. And it was really cool to be able to do that. But, how long is an ambulance going to take to come there? And Brooklyn Hospital is just down the street. It's still going to at least be like 15, 20 minutes. And that point, he could have probably died. And even if he stayed alive, if you have a decreased amount of oxygen-rich blood going to your brain, and if he can't ventilate, meaning you're not able to bring oxygen in and get carbon dioxide out. If you can't do that because you've got this thing that's obstructing your airway, you can die, or you can have major brain damage. You can get what they call anoxic brain injury.
Oh my goodness.
And so, having basic skills in CPR as parents of toddlers, as parents of kids swallow any and everything, toys, coins. Yeah. They shove beads up their nose. They swallow stuff. Whatever it is, if you can think that your child might put it in your mouth, if you heard about somebody else's kid, your kid can do the same thing. So you need to be able to be able to have at least basic CPR.
Where do we go to get this?
There's excellent. There are a number of different CPR centers and first aid training centers around the country. If you Google first aid CPR training, and we live in New York, so there's so many places they can. But I think for starters, you could look at the American Red Cross on their website. That can give you a base of operations where a number of training programs are around in your respective cities. But if you just Google, if you Google first aid CPR training, there's going to be a ton of stuff pop up.
We got work to do next.
Oh my God.
We've got work to do.
I can hook you up with some instructors because I know people who actually do trainings.
Yes, we need them. Oh
yes.
my God. We have so much work to do.
Yeah, I would do it now, but I'm not certified as an instructor anymore.
Yeah.
We were doing all that. We were training people in Haiti and did a full-fledged course on first responder training because we were training people who were drivers and laborers in first aid and emergency response. And so that's how I got my certification to do like first aid and CPR training later. But when I was a resident in Chicago, we also did the trainings for that because we were training nurses and docs to do their recertifications for first aid and CPR and advanced cardiac life support. So, we did it all the time, but I don't have my instructor certification, but I know some people who can do some trainings.
Dr. Robert, you're an angel on this planet. The work that you do is remarkable. It is a reminder that good people still exist. No. I know the whole good and evil and the dynamic we talked about, but truly the work that you do, you are saving lives. And not only that, you care to teach others to help one another. And that is just something is so remarkable, and it restores my hope within humanity, especially during dark times, that there are people doing the real work, the work that matters, the work that will continue on forever. So thank you for inspiring me. You're so selfless, and I hope you are so appreciated. I'm sure people have said thank you a million times over to you, but thank you.
Thank you.
Because it is hard work and you still care and you still give back and you still care to teach and just share your knowledge. And that wisdom is just it's priceless.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, and thanks for having me today. Thanks for having me back.
Of course. Yes.
on a different
you.
show.
Yes. Thank you so much.